Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Hello and welcome. My name is Julie Dahlquist, and I serve as the Senior Associate Director for Admission for the Masters in Asset Management program here at the Yale School of Management. So thank you so much for joining me for today's Application Insider Tips event. Today's session will focus on both the essay and recommendations section of the Masters in Asset Management application. And my goal is to provide some guidance as to how best to approach these very important two parts of the application. So I'll start today's session with a few slides addressing our general approach in admissions pertaining to the essay and recommendations and why we think these two requirements are so important. I'll move on to include some pro tips, and we'll also address some of the most common questions we get about essays and recommendations, and then I'll open it up for questions. For the Q&A portion after my short presentation, please plan to use the raise hand icon when you'd like to ask your question. And I'll get to as many of those as I can before our time is up. I aim to make this workshop as interactive as possible, so please feel free, again, when you're asking questions after the presentation to turn your camera on, but please stay muted when you aren't speaking. So let's get things started. So I'd like to start with answering the question, why did I pair recommendations and essays as part of one application tips session? It's because, in my opinion, these are often overlooked pieces of the application that could be, if leveraged correctly, incredibly additive to your application narrative. We often look at these two as parts of the application where you hold the most control over their quality, even though you might not think so. You do hold control over these. Both the essay and recommendations elements give a chance to provide an expanded narrative, more than just a score or a number. This gives our admissions team additional insight on how and why a candidate is approaching their graduate education, as well as how and why the candidate has approached their studies and professional opportunities in the past. All super helpful when we're selecting our class. So let's talk recommendations. Why do we ask for two recommendations, one academic and one professional? As stated, your letters of recommendation are important windows into your academic and professional experiences. Your academic recommendation offers insight into your academic preparedness by providing a firsthand perspective of your involvement in the classroom. And your professional recommendation provides additional context surrounding your work experiences and how you apply your skills in a professional setting. So who should write your recommendations? Regarding your academic recommendation, you should take care to select a recommender who is in a position to assess your performance in a university setting, such as a professor or academic mentor. The other recommendation must be from a professional or extracurricular supervisor or another individual who has worked with you in an applied setting, such as an internship or a full-time work experience, research, or long-term project. We highly recommend securing a recommendation from what you consider to be your most significant professional or applied experience. And I'd like to call out, while all letters must be written in English, we encourage you to find recommenders who can best speak to your past experiences, regardless of their English language fluency. We will evaluate only the substance of the recommendation, not the proficiency of the language used therein. Your recommenders may choose to write their letters in English or to write in their native language and use one of the many free translation programs available. So once you've entered the required recommender information on the application, click the Send to Recommender button to email the online recommendation form to your recommender. Please note that you must use your recommender's institutional or corporate email address. Submissions from a non-professional email address like Gmail or Yahoo or similar providers will be subject to additional review. And it's important to note here that if you're admitted to the Masters in Asset Management program, please be aware that the authenticity of your recommendations will be thoroughly vetted. To ensure the objectivity and independence of your recommendations, the written product must be entirely the work of your recommenders. Although you may discuss the recommendations with them, you may not have any involvement in drafting or submitting your letters of recommendation. We know that your recommenders are busy. and they may ask your assistance in drafting a letter for their review. Please resist this pressure and ask someone else instead. An authentic letter coming from an individual who is familiar with your work will always be the better option than a letter that was not wholly written by an independent source. Okay, so on to the good stuff, the pro tips here. So here I've listed some tips for the recommendation section of the application. Number 1, relationship over title. For professional recommendations, please choose relationships over titles. We care more about the quality of the relationship that you have with your recommender than the title that they hold. A supervisor who knows you well will provide us with the most meaningful perspective on your accomplishments, experiences, and professional background. Number 2, intentional recommendations. Academic references should know more than just your grades. When selecting your academic recommender, pick someone who knows you and your work well enough to give us a detailed perspective on your academic performance beyond simply the grade you received in their course. Specifics regarding your contribution in the classroom, how you interact with peers, and evidence of your intellectual curiosity are helpful context for the admissions committee to have when assessing your candidacy. So overall, please select recommenders who know you well and can speak to your strengths. Moving on to frequently asked questions. The first is, what if my recommender doesn't work for the same company anymore? So no problem. We completely understand that people change companies and positions all the time. Simply provide the current corporate or institutional email of your recommender when asked in the application, and know that he or she will be afforded the opportunity to describe the nature and context of the experience you have asked to be highlighted. And the second is, what if I've been out of school for a number of years? Do I still need to provide an academic recommendation? So we get this question from applicants all the time who have been working full-time for a number of years prior to applying to the Master's in Asset Management program. And truth be told, it's a totally fair question. That said, the admissions committee does feel strongly about receiving an academic recommendation for all applicants and encourages all applicants to provide one, even if they've been out of school for a while. At the end of the day, this is an academic program, and understanding your performance in a classroom setting is important to us. And I'll offer a side note here. If this is the case for you, it is completely in bounds to, possibly schedule a call with your former professor, or this even speaks to professional recommendations too. Schedule a call, have a discussion about some of the points that you remember about about your classroom experience. It's fine to jog their memory, and it may even be a good idea to give them an idea of why you are applying to this program or pursuing graduate education. So that's completely okay to do. Obviously, as stated before, you can't write any part of your recommendation, but it is fine to have a conversation with them and kind of remind them of some of the things that you learned in their class or some of the things you might have worked on in their class. So that is completely fine and encouraged, in fact. So understanding that some people may be farther away from their academic experience, we will weight your academic rec accordingly. And we do understand that the level of detail may not be quite as high as your professional recommendation. We expect to see a range in terms of quantity and depth of professional experience from our applicants, as well as the distance from your academic studies. And so as part of our holistic admissions process, we'll rely more heavily on your academic experiences and recommendation if you are a current senior or recent graduate. If you have more professional experience, we'll incorporate that depth of experience into our review process. So basically, we're evaluating based on the same overall criteria, but we're really meeting you where you are. And now the essay. So as you most likely know, this program is distinct amongst master's degrees due to its unique focus on the theory and practice of asset management. We want to understand what drives your interests in this field and how you envision the pursuit of those interests will play out for you in the career you launch after completing the program. This is the part that helps us do that. This is the part that helps us to understand what your intentions are. So the essay, we have one essay, and the essay is, what are your short and long-term career interests? Please describe what drives these interests and how they connect to your academic, professional, or personal experiences. Excuse me. So this is a very specialized program, and we want to understand how your interests align with what this program can offer. We're asking you to be both forward-looking and backward-looking in this question. In looking forward, we'd like you to identify what you are interested in pursuing during the program and your short-term career interests directly after completing the program. We'd also like to know how this translates into your longer-term aspirations. Looking backward, we'd like you to reflect on how these interests developed and how they are tied to the academic, professional, and personal experiences you've had to date, including what you still need to learn to accomplish and achieve your goals. I'd like to emphasize that you do not need to have everything all figured out. Maybe you're interested in several different fields or functions within asset management, or maybe you have a sense of what you'd like to try in the short term, but it could take you down one of several paths in the long term. Or maybe your interest is in a fundamental versus quantitative approach, or vice versa, but you're not yet sure of what sort of organization or role you'd like to work in to apply that approach. That is okay. We're most interested in hearing what has led you to want to pursue these interests and how they connect with what you've learned to date, and how, at this point in time, you can envision making your impact in the field. It's important to note that the essay has a 500-word limit, so we encourage you to be clear and concise in your communications. This should be more than enough space to respond to the question that we're asking. And I'd like to offer a note about the optional information section of the application, which appears on the same page as the essay question. So sometimes people term it as an essay as well. Most candidates do not need to complete this section. Please do not use it as an opportunity to answer a question that we haven't asked. Instead, if you need to provide some additional context around something that is part of the application, such as your reason for choosing an unconventional recommender, an unusual timeline for your academic or professional pathway, or context that will help us to understand perhaps a poor academic performance, this is the place to do it. And finally, as stated earlier when talking about recommendations, your essay and other written materials must entirely be your own work. Although you may ask others for general feedback, you may not allow anyone to write or edit your essay or other written materials. Okay. So listed here are some pro tips for the essay section of the application. And I'll start with number 1. Read the prompt closely and answer the question. This may sound pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised. So for first-time applicants to the Master's in Asset Management program, we have just one essay. It sounds obvious, but please make sure you are crafting your response for this specific question. Do not try to cut and paste sections from other essays you've written, as it makes for an unfocused, disjointed final effort. Spend the time and answer our question directly. Number 2, be intentional and reflective. This is a very specialized program, and we want to understand how your interests align with what this program has to offer. Take your time to reflect on why you are interested in asset management specifically. And a good essay will focus not just on what your post-program goals are, but where they came from and how you've developed them, and how you're positioning yourself to achieve them. Connect your past experiences to your future aspirations. And the key here really is reflection and strong self-awareness. Number 3, revise, edit, and revise again. Have someone read your essay to double check for typos and grammatical errors. Please be mindful of the word limit and take it from someone who does read a lot of the essays. More is not always better. So moving on to frequently asked questions here. The first is we often get specific questions regarding exactly what material or examples to include in the essay and how detailed to get, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, that's something that we in admissions cannot comment upon. We've given some really good guidance on how to best approach the essay question, and that's basically where our input has to stop. I ask you to take solace in the fact that you are best qualified to decide which information to include. You know best what's moved you and where you see yourself in the future. So be confident in your choices. Number two, the next frequently asked question has to do with the optional essay. I will reiterate what I said earlier. More is not better. We are extremely intentional regarding the information we ask on the application. And if we didn't ask for it, we've decided that we don't need that information to reach our admissions decision. The optional information section, again, is for additional context around something that is already part of the application. For example, we ask for your transcripts as part of the application. If you had one particular semester in school that your grades were lower than the rest, and you would like to provide some context, here would be the place to do that. Again, most applicants leave this section blank, and that is perfectly fine. Okay, so one final detail before I open it up for questions. Please note on your screen that our Masters in Asset Management, we have an asset management inbox, and that the email address is right on your screen. So if you should have any questions about the application, the Masters in Asset Management program, or admissions process, please don't hesitate to send us an email, and a member of the admissions committee will respond. We absolutely will respond. I'd like to thank you for joining me today and share that our Masters in Asset Management team looks forward to reading your applications and learning more about each of you. Gentle reminder that the application due date is January 9th. So please keep that in mind when you're preparing your application and going through your details.